Welcome to Vanishing Shores. The year is 1587. For the men, women, and children gathered on this North Carolina beach, life as they know it is about to change forever. They have crossed an ocean in search of a new world, a world where they can build a life free from the shackles of an old one. There are 115 of them, part of the third and largest group of settlers sent out by Sir Walter Raleigh's colony. And with them they carry the hopes and dreams of an entire nation. England at the time was a place of great social upheaval and economic uncertainty, but the arrival of gold in the New World had captured the attention and sparked the imagination of many. Stories of the New World circulated throughout England, and when Raleigh put out the call for settlers, more than 2,000 people volunteered, eager to leave behind a life of poverty for one of wealth beyond their wildest dreams. But when the time came to leave, only 115 were deemed worthy. The others were sent home, which is fortunate for them because what awaited those who made it to Roanoke was not the golden age they had envisioned, but a desperate fight for survival. Still, the colony bustled with activity. By the time the settlers arrived, 2 ships had already made the journey across the Atlantic and returned with supplies. A fort had been built, and several settlers from the earlier colonies were there to greet them. The fort, which they named Raleigh in honor of their benefactor, was a sturdy structure made of wood and earth, designed to protect the settlers from the Spanish, who were a constant threat in these waters. The fort was also equipped with a storehouse, barracks, and a kitchen, as well as a well to provide the settlers with fresh water. There was even a prison for those who broke the law or the rules of the colony. By all accounts, the colony was thriving, or at least it seemed that way. When the supply ships arrived, they brought with them not only food and other essentials, but also news from the outside world. From England came word that Queen Elizabeth I had died and had been succeeded by King Philip II. There were rumors of war with Spain and talk of a new colony being established in Florida. But there was no news of any ships being sent to Roanoke. The settlers had been on their own for nearly 2 years. With no word from England, the settlers began to explore the surrounding area. They ventured inland to find fertile ground for planting crops and to the coast to hunt for food and gather materials for building. It was during one of these trips that they encountered the first inhabitants of this land, the Native Americans. At first, relations between the 2 groups were friendly. The settlers learned a great deal from the natives about the land and its people, and they traded with them for food and other necessities. However, as time went on, the relationship between the settlers and the natives became increasingly strained. There were conflicts over land and resources, and the settlers began to feel threatened by the natives. In an effort to protect themselves, the settlers decided to build a second fort. They named this one Albemarle after the governor of Virginia. The settlers lived in the 2 forts for the next several months, growing crops, hunting and fishing, and trying to make a life for themselves in this new world. They also continued to explore the surrounding area and to trade with the natives. Then, in August of 1590, a supply ship arrived from England. It was the first one to reach Roanoke since the settlers had arrived 3 years earlier. On board were 300 colonists who had been sent to rescue the settlers. But when the ship arrived, it found no one. The forts were deserted, the houses destroyed, and there was no sign of the settlers anywhere. All that was left behind was a single clue, a word carved into a post in the shape of a cross. The rescuers searched for the settlers for weeks, but they were never found, and eventually the rescuers gave up and returned to England with the mystery of Roanoke still unsolved. Was the colony lost to history, or did the settlers simply vanish? We may never know the answer to that question, but we can appreciate the mystery and intrigue that surrounds the disappearance of the Roanoke colony. So many questions and so few answers. What happened to the settlers of Roanoke? Did they die? Were they killed by the natives? Or did they simply vanish into thin air? The truth is, we may never know the answers to these questions. But that's part of what makes the story of Roanoke so compelling. It's a story filled with mystery and intrigue, a story that has captured the imaginations of people for centuries. And now, it's time for you to make your voice heard. What do you think happened to the settlers of Roanoke? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like this one. This is what was carved into a tree in North Carolina. But what does it mean? In 1938, a man named John Smith was walking through the woods near his home when he came across something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Carved into the trunk of an old tree was the word Croatoan. He tried to make sense of it. Was it a name? Was it a message? What did it mean? And who had carved it there all those years ago? He decided to return to the spot the following day with his friend Thomas Justiça, and what they found only added more questions to the mystery. There were no signs of a struggle, no bodies, and no explanation for the strange carving. It almost looked like the person who had carved it had simply vanished into thin air. The area where the carving was found is known locally as Hanging Tree Neck. Legend has it that many people had been hanged there during the early days of the colony. But there was no evidence to support this story, and most people believed it was just a local myth. What made the discovery even more eerie was the fact that the carving was found at exactly the same spot where a young girl had gone missing several years earlier. Her name was Mary Lawson, and she had been the daughter of one of the area's most respected families. She had been known for her beauty and her bubbly personality, and her sudden disappearance had shocked the entire community. The local sheriff had investigated the case, but he had turned up nothing. All he had to go on was the fact that Mary had been seen talking to a strange man just before she vanished. But this was hardly enough to go on, and the case had eventually been closed with no answers. Many people had searched for Mary over the years, but their efforts had been fruitless. That was until 1938 when John Smith and Thomas Justiça stumbled upon the carving. They decided to search the area for any other clues, but they soon realized that it was a hopeless task. There was absolutely nothing to be found. As the years passed, the carving was slowly forgotten about, but every now and then someone would come across it and wonder who had carved it there and why. One of those people was a local woodcarver named Bill Cook, and he had an idea. He decided to carve his own message into the tree and see if anyone responded. He carved, "Is anybody out there?" Then he waited patiently for a reply, but it never came. Just as he was about to give up hope, he received a letter from a woman named Nancy. She told him that she had seen his carving and she wanted to help. Together, they decided to place a small plaque next to the tree with the carving so that other people could see it. But they soon realized that this was not going to be easy. For some reason, the local authorities were not interested in helping them. Despite the setbacks, Nancy and Bill were determined to solve the mystery. They began by searching through old records, trying to find out who had carved the word Croatoan into the tree. But their efforts were in vain. There was no record of the carving or of the mysterious man who had done it. Just when they were about to give up, they met an old man named George. George told them that he remembered the day that the carving appeared in the tree. He had been a young boy at the time, but he had seen a group of men carving the word Croatoan into the tree. The men had been part of a local gang, and George believed that they had carved the word Croatoan as a warning to the townspeople. But why? What were they trying to warn them about? Unfortunately, George had never found out. The gang had disappeared shortly after the carving, and he had never seen them again. To this day, the mystery of the carving remains unsolved, but there are many theories as to what it could mean. Some believed that it was a warning to the townspeople, while others believed that it was simply a prank. What do you think the carving means? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. What do you do when you find an ancient Native American burial ground on your new property? Do you call an archaeologist, or do you call the Ghostbuster? In today's video, we explore whispers in the wilderness. Hi, I'm the host. These are scary stories from the wild unknown. Our first story comes from an old National Geographic article titled The Legend of the Skinwalkers by Clyde Cluckhone. The article details Navajo legends told to him by a medicine man about a race of evil beings that prowl the night, taking human and animal forms, practicing dark magic, and preying on unsuspecting travelers. Some of these strange wanderers have pale skin, which sets them apart from the Navajo and other Native American tribes. The author writes that one day he was traveling with two Navajo men through a remote part of the reservation. They had been walking for hours along a lonely trail, and it was getting late. The men were talking in their native language, and the author could tell they were uneasy. Finally, he heard the word Yi-nal-delushi and asked what it meant. One of the men answered, "It's a witch devil. It's all right during the day, but at night it comes out and changes into all kinds of animals." The author pressed for more information, but the men became agitated and told him it was getting too dark to continue. They needed to make camp. Once settled, they warned the author not to go outside in the darkness, promising that whatever was out there would try to change him into an animal. Of course, he didn't listen and went for a nighttime stroll. He heard voices and howls in the darkness, but he couldn't understand what they were saying. Just then, a shape shifted in front of him and vanished. He turned and ran back to camp, never seeing anything in the darkness but feeling like something had brushed against his leg. Could this be a dog, a coyote, or something more sinister? This is never explained. Our next story comes from an article on Mysterious Universe called "Did Ancient Native Americans Have a Hallowed Earth?" by Scott C. Waring. In the article, Mr. Waring explores the idea that Native Americans knew about Hollow Earth long before modern explorers. He begins his investigation by referencing an article published in 1883. The article, written by a journalist named John D. Miles, details his meeting with a Cherokee elder who claimed his people came from a lost continent in the Arctic. According to the elder, the continent was destroyed in a great flood, and only a few escaped on a great raft and made their way to the New World. When questioned further, the elder explained that his ancestors remembered entering a great cave at the North Pole, where they found a warm and hospitable world. This underground kingdom was inhabited by people who lived in peace and harmony until one day the supply ships stopped coming. Then they began to die of starvation. Then the great flood came and only a few survived. Did the Cherokee witness the destruction of a hollow earth? In another Native American legend, the Hopi speak of a time when the world was covered in water. Their world was inhabited by the Pahana, evil water spirits who preyed on humans. However, one human, named Tawa, managed to escape the watery abyss and build a new life on dry land. He taught the survivors how to grow crops and live in harmony with the natural world. Eventually, the Hopi people forgot about the Pahana and lived happily ever after. Our final story comes from a Reddit thread asking people to share their experiences with ghosts while camping. One user recounts a terrifying incident that happened while backpacking with some friends in the Beartooth Wilderness in the early 2000s. Their tent was near a lake, and in the morning they found mysterious footprints in the mud near their tent. They continued hiking, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that someone was watching them. As they rounded a bend in the trail, they saw a strange sight. Two backpacks were sitting on the ground next to two empty tents, and in the distance they could hear voices and footsteps. They quickly hid behind a log and watched as a group of pale strangers walked past them without a word. They were thin and dirty and seemed to be from another time period. After they passed, the hikers unhid themselves and continued down the trail. Suddenly, the feeling of being watched returned, and they turned to see the pale strangers walking back towards them. The hikers ran as fast as they could, making it to their car safely. At the end of the day, they recounted the experience and wondered if they had just witnessed Bigfoot or something else entirely. Thank you for watching. Would you hike alone in the wilderness? Let me know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, stay tuned for more scary stories. See you next time. From a young age, we're taught to fear the dark. Our parents would use it as a tool to get us to behave, warning that if we didn't eat our vegetables, monsters would be lurking under our beds at night, waiting to gobble us up. But what if there's more truth to this than we'd like to admit? Hi, I'm your host, and today we're exploring the darkest corners of the internet to bring you the top 10 creepy pasta from Reddit. Let's get into it. Number 10. Shadows on the Shoreline. This story comes from a Reddit user. It was a cold evening on the Oregon coast. My girlfriend and I were staying at a cabin that was right on the beach. We had the whole place to ourselves, which was great because it meant we could scream and yell at each other all we wanted and no one would hear us. We were having a pretty rough patch in our relationship. We woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like screams in the darkness. Big, guttural screams. My girlfriend and I looked at each other and started laughing. It was obviously some animal. Then we heard what sounded like whispers in the dark, unintelligible whispers. My girlfriend and I started screaming and making tons of noise. We didn't want to go outside and check it out. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, we got up and went out onto the deck. The whole area around the cabin was covered in thousands of little pebbles, the type of pebbles that make a noise when you walk on them. And surrounding the cabin in a near-perfect circle were hundreds of little indentations where the pebbles had been pushed into the soft sand. It was almost as if someone or something had jumped up and down in the middle of the night on all four sides of the cabin. The whispers and cries in the night. No idea. But I swear to God, if my girlfriend didn't see those footprints too, I would have thought she was lying to me. I don't like the idea of being watched while I sleep. Number 9. Cabin fever. So I was working for a company that provides adventure experiences in the wilderness, ropes courses, team-building exercises, etc. One of the places we worked at was an old dude's ranch in the middle of nowhere. There were cabins that slept 8 people each scattered around the property. We would have groups come in and they would do their thing during the day and then stay in the cabins at night. One time, we had a group come in and they were really rowdy. They kept us pretty busy with their shenanigans. So by the end of the day, we were relieved when they went to their cabins and left us alone. Well, at about 3 a.m., I was awoken in my cabin to what sounded like screams in the forest. Big, guttural screams. Obviously, I was freaked out sitting in the cabin by myself. Then I heard what sounded like whispers. At first, it sounded like they were coming from outside the cabin, but then it sounded like they were coming from inside. I sat there paralyzed with fear until the sun started coming up. Then I got the nerve to go check out the common areas of the cabin, and that is when I noticed that the door to one of the rooms was slightly open. It was the room with the bunk beds. I slowly opened the door and walked in. All the beds were empty except for one. On that bed was a single shoe. It was a little girl's shoe, a size that didn't match any of the bunk beds. Then I started hearing the whispers again. They seemed to be coming from the closet. I quickly shut the door and ran to the bathroom. I stayed in that bathroom for the rest of the day until the group left. I never told anyone else about that. To this day, I wonder what was in that closet. 8. Disease. This happened to my grandfather, his sister, and their 2 friends while they were stationed in the army in North Africa during World War II. They were traveling in separate jeeps. The first 3 days were fine, but on the 4th day the men started feeling sick. By the 5th day, they were all lying in the back of their jeeps, delirious with a fever and mumbling in their sleep. Their commanding officer drove them to the hospital, but by the time they got there, it was too late. They were all dead. The medical examiner believed that they died from some sort of unknown disease brought over from Italy. The weird thing is that the men had never even been to Italy. Their commanding officer had driven them straight from the boat when they arrived in North Africa to the hospital where they died. How did they catch a disease that only existed in Italy? What was the disease? Where did it come from? To this day, no one knows. Number 7. Betrayal. This story comes from a Reddit user. The year before last, I was backpacking through Southeast Asia with a good friend of mine. We met up in Bangkok and decided to take a long weekend and visit the Ayutthaya Historical Park, which is just north of Bangkok. It's basically the ruins of an ancient city. We arrived late at night and booked a hotel near the park. When we arrived at the hotel, we were told that we would need to leave early the next morning if we wanted to see the park before it got too hot outside. We agreed and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, we were awoken in our room to what sounded like screams in the darkness. I just assumed that it was my friend snoring really loudly. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, we checked out of the hotel and headed towards the historical park. As we were walking, my friend suddenly stopped. He turned to me with a horrified look on his face and said, "I think someone followed us here." I thought he was joking, so I just laughed at him. Then he started explaining that in the middle of the night, he had awoken to what sounded like screams in the darkness. I realized that I had heard the same thing in the middle of the night, but I had just assumed that it was my friend snoring really loudly. We decided to head back to Bangkok. On the way, we stopped for some food and to use the restroom. When we came out of the restaurant, we saw two men staring at us. The men were clearly trying to figure out who we were and why they looked familiar. My friend and I looked at each other and then ran to our car. We haven't seen those men since, but to this day, I wonder who they were and what they wanted. Number 6, the house guest. This story comes from a Reddit user. A family friend was helping a relative move into her new apartment. She went to grab a glass of water from the kitchen when she heard what sounded like screams in the hallway. She figured it must have been kids, so she ignored it. A little while later, she heard what sounded like whispers in the vents. She told her daughter about the whispers and asked if she had heard it too. Her daughter said yes. The two of them decided to just ignore it and go to bed. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, they called an exterminator to check for mice or rats in the vents. The exterminator couldn't find anything, so they figured it must have just been their imaginations. That was until the next night when they heard it again. The screams and the whispers. They called another exterminator, but once again, nothing was found. To this day, they have no idea what made those sounds. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to let us know in the comments below. We'll see you next time. Bye. When it comes to scary stories, there's nothing quite like the tale of the lost colony of Roanoke. There are plenty of theories as to what happened to those settlers, but no one knows for sure. And it looks like we may never know the truth behind their disappearance. Hi everyone, I'm your host, and this is Cursed Bloodline Legends. Today we are discussing the Roanoke colony. Make sure to come prepared with your own theories as to what could have happened to the settlers and share them in the comments below. Just a reminder, this series is not intended to reinforce harmful stereotypes or spread misinformation about indigenous peoples. The information presented is for the purpose of exploring folklore and legends within a historical context. The year is 1585 when the first group of English settlers arrived in the New World. They were led by Sir Walter Raleigh, and they settled in an area they named Virginia in hopes of finding gold, which would make them rich and bring fame and fortune to the English crown. When they didn't find any gold, they turned to farming. But the settlers struggled to adapt to life in the wilderness, and many of them died. In 1590, when another ship arrived to check in on the colony, they found it completely abandoned. All that remained was the word Croatoan, carved into a post. Since then, historians have been left scratching their heads over what could have possibly happened to the settlers. There is some speculation that the settlers of Roanoke merged with a local tribe, but the details of this theory are unclear. One of the most popular legends surrounding the Roanoke colony is the idea that the settlers merged with a local tribe, but those tribes spoke of curses, illness, and spirits that followed the Roanoke settlers wherever they went. One such story comes from the Croatoan tribe. According to legend, the Croatoan people lived along the coast of what is now North Carolina, long before the arrival of the English settlers. They were known for their skills in fishing and trading, and they had a deep connection to the land and sea. But everything changed when the settlers arrived. The English settlers brought with them diseases that the Croatoans had no immunity to. Smallpox, measles, and influenza swept through the villages, killing many. Those who survived were left with disabilities, and the population was decimated. Those who did survive began to mistrust the settlers and retreated further inland. According to legend, the spirit of the land, known as the Uktena, was very powerful. She commanded alligators, turtles, and snakes, and used her powers to protect her people from harm. When the Uktena learned of the suffering of the Croatans, she intervened. She took on the form of a beautiful woman and visited the English settlers, warning them to leave or face the consequences. But the settlers ignored her warning and pressed on, determined to make the colony work. And so the Uktena took action. She unleashed her animal spirits upon the settlers, causing widespread destruction and death. The settlers' crops were destroyed, their homes were burned, and many of them perished. Those who survived fled into the wilderness, where they were stalked by the animal spirits of the Uktena. Some say the settlers eventually merged with the Croatans and learned to live in harmony with the land. Others say they were all killed or taken captive by the Croatans. Still, others believe that the spirits of the settlers are forever trapped in the wilderness, doomed to wander the earth for eternity. Though this story has all the makings of a terrifying horror film, it also raises an important point. The settlers weren't the only ones affected by the arrival of Europeans. The indigenous peoples of North America suffered just as much, if not more, from the diseases brought over from Europe. Smallpox, measles, and influenza devastated Native American populations who'd never even seen a European until the fateful day they became sick and often died. Historians estimate that as many as 90% of Native Americans died from diseases brought over by Europeans. This had a devastating impact on their way of life, as entire communities were wiped out and traditional knowledge and culture were lost. But despite the devastation that disease brought to Native American populations, there are still those who tell stories of survival and resilience. Stories of those who fought back against the invaders who brought them to their knees with superior weaponry and numbers. Stories like that of the Croatans and the Uktena remind us that the history of the Americas is a complicated one. It wasn't just the Europeans who were affected by the arrival of settlers, but also the indigenous peoples who'd been living there for centuries. Their stories are just as important and should be remembered. So, what do you think? Do you believe the legend that the Croatans and the Uktena were responsible for the disappearance of the Roanoke colony? Or do you think there's another explanation for what happened to the settlers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're there, don't forget to join our community. We've got weekly content covering all things paranormal, folklore, and mythology. If you enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button and subscribe. Share this episode with a friend. New episodes premiere every Wednesday. Until next time, remember to stay safe and stay curious. The year is 1587. A small group of British colonists eke out an existence on the shores of Roanoke Island. Life is hard, food is scarce, and the relentless sun beats down on their flimsy shelters. But one evening, as the sun dips below the horizon, something strange happens. The colonists hear the sound of children playing. At first, they think it's a trick of their weary minds, but the sound grows louder and more distinct. And then they see them, the children, running through the trees, their laughter echoing in the twilight. When the colonists call out to them, the children stop and turn toward the sound of the voices. For a moment, there is a strange, silent communion between the two groups, the living and the dead. Then the children disappear into the trees and are never seen again. More than 3 centuries have passed since the mysterious disappearance of the Roanoke colonists. Now it's 1920, and Roanoke Island is part of a chain of barrier islands off the coast of North Carolina known as the Outer Banks. A popular vacation destination for wealthy summer visitors, the area has long been associated with mystery and intrigue. The lost colony of Roanoke was only the beginning. There are other stories here, stories of ghostly children who wander the beach at night, of specters who cry out for help from their watery graves, and eerie apparitions that appear and disappear at the edge of your vision. These are the spirits left behind. It's summertime on Roanoke Island, but the sun is unusually cold today. Thick fog rolls in from the ocean, blanketing the island in an eerie mist. A steady wind whips across the beach, carrying with it the mournful cry of gulls. I pull my jacket tighter around me and walk along the shoreline, my eyes scanning the beach for any sign of life. It's then that I see it, a set of child-sized footprints in the wet sand. They're barely visible, almost washed away by the tide, but I can make out the small toes, the perfect spacing between each impression. I follow the footprints as they lead me further down the beach, away from the crowds of tourists. I feel a growing sense of unease, as if I'm being watched, but when I turn to look behind me, there's nothing there. The footprints end abruptly at the water's edge, and I can't help but shiver. Was I really just walking behind a pair of ghosts? As the legend goes, one night the colonists heard the sound of children's laughter coming from the forest. They ventured into the woods to investigate and found a group of spectral children playing by the light of the moon. The children seemed happy and carefree, oblivious to the fact that their time had come and gone. The colonists tried to communicate with the children, but the spirits ignored them, their laughter echoing through the trees. This spectral visitation was not a one-time event. Throughout the years, people have reported seeing the ghost of children on Roanoke Island, their laughter and screams echoing across the centuries. Some say the children are the descendants of the lost colony, forever doomed to wander the earth. Others believe they are the victims of a tragic event, their souls trapped on the island. Whatever the truth may be, their presence is a constant reminder of the island's haunting past. But the spirits don't just appear at a distance. Sometimes they make their presence felt up close and personal. Imagine sitting on the porch of a historic inn, sipping sweet tea and listening to the crickets chirp when suddenly the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you feel a cold hand on your shoulder. You turn to see an apparition standing behind you, its face obscured by the darkness. Or perhaps you're strolling along the beach late at night when you hear a voice calling out to you from the darkness. You stop and listen, but when you turn to face the sound, there's nothing there but the wind and the waves. These are the kinds of experiences that have led some to believe that Roanoke Island is one of the most haunted places in America. I continue my walk along the beach, my mind filled with these stories and legends. The wind picks up and the fog thickens, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of me. I feel a sudden sense of dread, as if the spirits of Roanoke Island are trying to make their presence known to me. Just then, I hear a voice, a woman's voice calling out for help. I freeze, trying to listen for more. Is someone in trouble? Or is it just the wind playing tricks on my mind? The voice seems to come from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied whisper in the fog. Then, just as suddenly as it began, it stops. I take a deep breath and try to shake off the feeling of dread that has been settling over me like a shroud. I tell myself it's just the wind, nothing more. But as I turn to go, I catch a glimpse of something in the fog, a dark shape that seems to be watching me. I stop and stare, trying to make out what it is, but it's gone as quickly as it appeared. I feel a chill run down my spine, and I can't help but wonder, am I really alone on this beach? Roanoke Island is a place of mystery and intrigue, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead seem to be blurred. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, there's no denying that this island is steeped in history, a history that includes the unexplained and the unexplainable. As I continue my walk along the beach, I can't help but feel a sense of sadness for the people who came before me, the people whose lives were cut short or who simply vanished without a trace. I think of the children whose laughter still echoes on the wind, the settlers who disappeared into the forest and never came out. And I wonder if they, too, sometimes walk this beach in the pale moonlight, forever searching for a way to find peace. What secrets did the colonists bury in the ground before they built their homes on top of them? What could those secrets be? And are there still some things hidden beneath our feet today? In this episode, we're going to look at the disturbing things buried under colonial houses. But before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. The early years of European colonization were brutal. Not only were entire populations of native peoples being wiped out by disease and war, but settlers were dying too. The winters were harsh and unforgiving, and people were not prepared for the cold. Hunger was also a problem. If the crops failed or an animal got loose in the settlers' fields, it could mean starvation for all. And finally, there was the constant threat of attack from neighboring colonies or the very natives whose lands they had just taken. All of these factors meant that life during the colonial period was short and dangerous. And the people who lived through it did so knowing that it might end at any moment. It makes sense, then, that they would want to protect their homes as much as possible. But what sorts of things did they hide, and why? In 1994, a man named Charles R. Gehring was doing some renovations on his house in New York when he came across some strange cylindrical holes underneath the floorboards. He decided to investigate and ended up discovering a total of 34 holes filled with items like animal bones, glass, ceramics, nails, and metal. Further research revealed that the house had been constructed in 1762 and that its original owner, Abraham de Peyster, had been a wealthy man. He also knew that at some point during the renovations, workers had found human remains and turned them into the local police. All of this led him to believe that the items he was finding were the remnants of an underfloor vault where Abraham and his family had stored valuables and important documents. This theory was backed up by the fact that there was a perfectly intact brick wall surrounding the holes, suggesting they had once been used for a specific purpose and were not merely the result of random digging. But the exact nature of that purpose remains unknown. Then there's the case of the Puritans who founded the Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1630. Historians have long wondered why the Puritans practiced such extreme forms of punishment, including putting people to death for minor crimes like having extramarital affairs. Some historians have speculated that the Puritans may have buried their own dark secrets, and that knowledge of those secrets could bring shame upon them and their colony. This theory is supported by the fact that many of the Puritans' records are incomplete or missing entirely, which has led to speculation that they may have deliberately destroyed or concealed certain records to protect themselves from future accusations. But perhaps even more disturbing is the possibility that the Puritans buried something unearthly, something that would go against everything they stood for and could ruin their reputation if it were discovered. For example, some historians believe that the Puritans may have had contact with Native Americans who practiced witchcraft. If this is true, it's possible that they buried evidence of that contact to prevent their colony from being tainted by association. After all, the Puritans were known for their intense religious beliefs and their persecution of those accused of witchcraft. Or maybe, just maybe, they buried something a little more sinister. After all, one of the most famous cases of witchcraft happened right next door in Salem, Massachusetts. And while there is no evidence that the Puritans buried anything there, it is possible that they may have done so in other areas. So, what do you think? Were the Puritans hiding something dark and shameful, or were the strange happenings in Salem simply a product of mass hysteria? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Whether it was the threat of attack, the struggle for survival, or something else entirely, the colonists clearly felt the need to hide things underground. But what exactly they were hiding remains a mystery. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about colonial America, check out the links below. And until next time, happy haunting. They say that in America there's only two certainties in life: death and taxes. But if you live here long enough, you can probably think of a few other things that are guaranteed to happen. Like eventually, you'll need to see a dentist, your cell phone bill will go up, or you'll have to deal with the government in some form or fashion. And dealing with the government is a crapshoot at the best of times, especially when they hold all the cards. And speaking of cards, did you know that the U.S. government has a secret deck of them? Not like playing cards, but a literal deck where important federal documents used to be stored. In 1984, a Freedom of Information Act request was made to the National Archives and Records Administration, otherwise known as NARA, for all documentation on the Kennedy assassination from 1963. Now, the request was pretty specific. It asked for all documentation related to the assassination, including photographs and X-rays. And it also asked that the documents not be marked classified. Now, it took a while, but eventually Nara complied, providing thousands of pages of documents. But then the requester got a little suspicious because some of the documents clearly had been marked classified after the fact. And then he noticed something else really strange. Some of the document numbers that were listed on the documents didn't match up with the actual documents. The index cited document numbers 1 through 29, but several of the actual documents started with numbers 50 and 60, and so on. So it appeared as though some of the documents were missing. So the requester filed another Freedom of Information Act request asking specifically for the missing documents. And this time he got an answer that was even more shocking. Nara claimed that they had no missing documents and that those numbers were just placeholders. But then they took it a step further. They claimed that some of the documents that had been provided were actually duplicates and should have never been released in the first place. To make matters worse, Nara refused to release any of the documents that were actually missing under the guise of ongoing investigations. Now, we don't know which investigations because they never said. But also, that doesn't really make sense because the assassination happened in 1963. It's 1984. That is 21 years later. What kind of investigation takes 21 years? But perhaps the most damning piece of evidence was that one of the assassination files that had been provided to the requester had the word "top secret" stamped across it. But when the government was asked about it, they claimed that there was no top secret file on the assassination. The man who originally requested the files would later say that he believed the government was hiding evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald was not acting alone and that there was a conspiracy. But he wasn't the only one. Just 2 years earlier, another Freedom of Information Act request was made, asking for all evidence of a cover-up in the Kennedy assassination. This guy must have gotten wind of the fact that the government had already doctored the official story because his request was very specific. He asked for any evidence that the Warren Commission had ignored, suppressed, or destroyed, and he also asked for the names and affiliations of anyone involved in any sort of cover-up. He got an answer, but it was infuriating. The government claimed that there was no evidence of a cover-up and that the Warren Commission was the greatest investigation in American history. But again, they weren't forthcoming with all the evidence. When asked why certain pieces of evidence were ignored, the government claimed that it was to protect ongoing investigations. What investigations? We don't know. But at least this time the government didn't claim that the documents were missing. Now, these stories are pretty crazy, but they're true. These are actual events that happened. And although it's only speculation that the government was covering up evidence of extraterrestrial life, there are a lot of other cases where it's much more clear that they are trying to hide the truth from us. Check out this playlist here for more videos where the government is definitely trying to hide the truth. Or check out this video over here that YouTube thinks you should watch. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next video. Hi, it's me. Number 10. The Curse of Croatoan. There are some mysteries that continue to plague us even after all these years, like the disappearance of Amelia Earhart or the fate of the lost colony of Roanoke. And then there are mysteries that continue to find new ways to invade our lives, like the Curse of Croatoan. It all started in 1849 when Edgar Allan Poe published a story titled The Narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket. The story was about a whaling ship called the Grampus that was wrecked by a giant wave while sailing off the coast of South America. In the chaos, the crew abandoned ship and headed toward a nearby island for safety. But they soon realized that the island was uninhabited, and they were stranded. They managed to survive for a few days by eating the ship's biscuits, but eventually they began to get desperate. In the end, the men drew lots to decide who would be sacrificed and eaten by the others. And so the horror story goes. In the midst of this madness, one man, Richard Parker, decided to stay behind on the ship instead of eating his friends. He survived by drinking salty ocean water and eating only what little remained of the dog biscuits. And after 20 long days, he was finally rescued. Poe wrote the story based on an actual event that happened in 1820. A group of sailors from Nantucket had sailed to South America to hunt whales, but their ship ended up being crushed by a massive wave, and they were forced to abandon ship and land on an island. Just like Poe wrote about in his story. The real-life survivors resorted to cannibalism in order to stay alive, just like Poe described. But here's where things get weird. When the captain of the rescue ship asked the sole survivor why he had waited so long to be rescued, Parker explained that he had been taking care of the dead bodies of his friends and shipmates, and that is why he didn't make a fire or any other kind of signal to attract attention. The captain was horrified and demanded to know how could he possibly eat the bodies of his friends. And that's when Parker told him about the cannibalism that had taken place on the island. But there was something else strange going on here. The island where the men had landed was completely unknown to the Europeans, yet Parker knew the name of it. He said they had landed on an island named Croatoan. Croatoan? Now, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you might recognize that name because it's been a popular Native American term for a tribe located in North Carolina. But this is where things get really weird. The exact same thing happened again in 1937 when Amelia Earhart disappeared over the Indian Ocean. Her last known position was 156 degrees east, right near the tiny uninhabited island of Nikumaroro, which was also called Croatoan. And in the early 1900s, the explorer Wilhelm Müller Stephenson also searched for the lost city of El Dorado in a remote part of South America. He found the ruins of a civilization, but when he tried to tell the world about it, he was ignored. But before he died, he left behind a message saying he had discovered the lost city of gold, but it was on an island called Croatoan. Some people believe that all of these explorers were actually talking about the same island, the mysterious Isle of Croatoan. But the mystery doesn't end there. In 1991, a storm hit the island of Croatoa and revealed a stone monolith covered in strange symbols. The monolith was too big for any single person to move, and it had obviously been buried by the sea. No one knows where the monolith came from or what the strange symbols mean, but some people believe it's proof that the island has been inhabited by a mysterious race of people since ancient times. And let's not forget about the lost colony of Roanoke, which was established by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1585 on an island off the coast of North Carolina. The entire colony of more than 100 men, women, and children simply vanished, and the only clue to their disappearance was the word Croatoan carved into a post. So, what is the meaning of Croatoan? Is it some kind of code or message from beyond the grave? Or is there something more sinister lurking beneath the surface? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more videos like these. See you next time. Bye. There's nothing like a good mystery, is there? A puzzle that has no answer, a crime with no criminal, a disappearance with no explanation. We love to speculate, theorize, create stories to fill in the gaps of what we don't know. And what we don't know can be terrifying. Take, for example, the strange case of the Roanoke colony. It's a tale you may have heard before, the story of an entire English settlement in North Carolina that seemingly vanished into thin air in the late 16th century. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. All that's left behind, an eerie message carved into a post in the colony's deserted buildings. And even after hundreds of years, the mystery remains unsolved. Or does it? What if the truth is far more terrifying than any theory? A haunting truth that will echo throughout eternity. Because what if Roanoke was never solved? What if it was never supposed to be solved? What if the colony didn't just vanish but became something else? Something more? Something that now lives in the very foundation of America itself? Let me explain. Imagine, for a moment, that you are an explorer, one of the first Europeans to set foot in the New World. You've braved the harsh seas and the unknown dangers of the wilderness, all for the promise of adventure, riches beyond your wildest dreams. But as you sail along the coast of North Carolina, you stumble upon something that chills you to the bone, a ghost town. Before you are the remains of a settlement, houses and other buildings abandoned and decaying, as if the inhabitants vanished without a trace. You venture deeper into the town and discover a single word carved into a wooden post: Croatoan. With each passing day, more settlers arrive, lured by the same hopes of fortune and glory. But they, too, are met with the same haunting sight and the same cryptic message. And over the years, the tales of Roanoke become a legend, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, a ghost story to scare away the loneliness of the frontier. And then, suddenly, in the 20th century, it happens again. Archaeologists uncover the site of the lost colony, and with it, the mystery of Roanoke captures the imagination of a new generation. Theories abound. The settlers were killed by the native population, perhaps, or succumbed to disease and starvation. Maybe they simply picked up and moved elsewhere. But none of these theories can explain it all. The mystery endures, and with it, the haunting question: what really happened here? Could it be that the people of Roanoke didn't just disappear, but are still out there, living in the shadows, unseen and unknown? Perhaps they retreated deep into the woods when the explorers arrived, choosing to hide rather than be found. Or maybe they merged with the native tribes, their descendants living among us to this very day. If that's true, then the real mystery of Roanoke isn't the disappearance, but the survival. For what is it to be human if you have no hope for the future, no dreams, no aspirations, only the will to survive, to keep going no matter what? In that sense, the people of Roanoke may not have been lost at all. They simply chose to live a different life, one that we can only imagine. So, as you walk among the ruins of the lost colony today, remember that there are some things that are better left unknown. Some mysteries are best left unsolved. For who knows what horrors might be lurking in the shadows of our past, waiting to be uncovered. Thank you for watching. Now it's time for you to make your voice heard. Leave your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And while you do that, I'll leave you with one final thought. Did Roanoke ever truly vanish? Or did it change? Become something eternal, a ghost story living inside America's foundation, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be retold?